Okay, now we're at part 3. Story 7, The First Skyscraper. Move that over a little bit. Okay. How long Noah and his family stayed on Mount Ararat, nobody knows. It is quite likely that they made it their home for a long time, using the ark as a storage house for food and seed they had brought with them. There was indeed nowhere else for them to live, not a house or a building of any kind. So here they stayed while Shem, Ham, and Japheth went exploring in the nearby valleys looking for a good place to settle down and start farming again. At last the day came when they decided to leave the ark and take all their belongings to their new home. As they started down the mountain, they must have looked back sadly many times at the great ship that had meant so much to them for so many years, until at last it was hidden from view by the mist that covered the peaks. Whether they ever returned to it, we don't know, or what became of it. Perhaps it was buried under deep snow that later fell upon it and finally rotted away. The downward trek was difficult, but there was no road, of course, not even a trail to go of any kind. They had to clamber over jagged rocks, massive boulders, and fallen trees. In the hollows of the hills, they came across large bodies of water and vast areas of swampy land. Every step of the way, they saw fresh evidence of the awful devastation caused by the flood. Everywhere there seemed to be more fresh marks of the curse that sin had brought upon the world. Oh, itchy nose. Uh, his hair does do that. But there was no time to be lost. No time to be lost. They needed to build a new home, and quickly, for there was a baby coming. The Bible says that Aphax, Ar, Arphax, Arphaxad was born 2 years after the flood. It's Arphaxad. Arphax, Arphaxadad. Okay, was born 2 years after the flood. He was Shem's little boy and Noah's grandson. And where he was born, I'm sure Noah, when he was born, I'm sure Noah was very proud of him. He was the first baby mentioned in the Bible as being born in the New World. Whew, funny name though. But he was not the only baby born on in those pioneer days. Other babies were born after him. Shem, Ham, and Japheth all had very large families. Soon the first home they built wasn't large enough to hold them, and they began to spread out. As the children grew up and got married, they too went off and started homes of their own. Thus slowly at first, then more and more rapidly, the earth began to repopulate. At the end of the first century after the flood, Noah's family had grown into hundreds of families and lots of children. There may well have been a 500,000 people on the earth. One of the big questions all those people talked about was where to live. Should they divide and go away to some distant, unexplored part of the world, or should they stay near? And then, of course, got an illustration down at the bottom of people moving. Okay. Should they stay near home? Most of them decided that they would rather keep together. Nobody wanted to go far from great grandfathers Noah, who you will remember lived for 350 years after the flood. Many times they must have talked about the beautiful world that Noah and his sons had known before the flood, and how it was destroyed because of sin. What wonderful stories Noah could tell them of those days. Nobody doubted the flood then. They were too close to it, and if anybody questioned whether the story of the ark was true, he had to climb up Mount Ararat and see for himself. One day, somebody raised a question. How do we know where How do we know there will not be another flood that will drown us as our forefathers were drowned? But there's a rainbow, someone said. When we see that, we are we are to remember God's promise that He will never again destroy earth by a flood. But it isn't reasonable to trust our future and our children's future on rainbows, argued another. We should do something about it, and make ourselves safe in case of another flood comes. And so they said to one another, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly, and they made brick from stone and slime had they for mortar, stone. So their brick, they called it stone, and then slime for mortar. And they said, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach into the heavens, and let us make us a name, lest it will shatter about, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Ooh, King James, get it again. An idea caught on, led by Nimrod, the mighty hunter. Everybody had soon helped. Okay, give me. The idea caught on. Led by Nimrod, the mighty hunter, everybody was soon helping to make bricks and carry them to the building site. Everybody, that is, except for Noah and some of others who remembered God's promise and trusted Him to keep them. To build a tower to reach above the clouds was a great task and must have taken a long time and a lot of hard labor. But gradually it began to take shape. Week by week, month by month, the first skyscraper rose above the plain of Shinar. 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 As it grew higher and higher, with many lines of people patiently carrying the bricks up the steep ramps, everybody felt pleased. Now, they could build a large city around this tower. Now they could build a large city around this tower and have a safe place of refuge should another flood have came upon them. But God was not pleased. He did not like that. He did not like his word doubted any more than you or I do. The Bible said that God came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. All the hundreds of busy builders, not one recognized that God was so near, but he was right beside them. He brought They thought they were getting along very nicely without him, but they weren't, not really. It was never wise to forget God, for he is and knows everything we do. And what did God think of the tower and the tower the people were building? Not much. Indeed, it must have seemed very small and paltry, Paltry, to him who made the mountains, who raised up the mighty Himalayas of India, the lofty Alps of Switzerland, the high Andes of Chile and Peru, and the great Rockies of the North America. What a pity! What a pitiful little pile of earth it was after all. And then we got a little illustration of them working on it. Go next page. And then we have a big one. Look. Now that's what it looks like. That's what it looked like. Or his imagination. And this, of course, is the illustration. Is a painting. It's by Herbert Rudin. The higher they built, the prouder they were of their tower. But suddenly their language was confused, and everybody had to stop building, and they scattered in all directions. And that was on here for the illustration for this, for the caption for this illustration. But we're not in our story, though. Yet it was dangerous. God saw it would tend to hold the people in one place, whereas he wanted them to spread all over the earth. Then, too, if they had stayed together, not only would a great city grow up here, but an empire which, controlled by evil men, could thwart his gracious purpose for mankind. Something had to be done, and God chose a novel way to upset the program. He mixed up the builder's speech. In other words, he caused some of them to talk one language and some another, and so they couldn't understand each other. The effect was amazing. Just imagine what would happen at school one morning if every child in the classroom suddenly begins talking in different languages? How far would how far would teacher get with the lesson? At what and what sort of game could you play at recess? Everything would be horrible, one terrible muddle, wouldn't it? Most likely school would have to close and everybody would be sent home. And that's just what happened at the Tower of Babel. The overseers called for more bricks, and a man brought him mortar. Another called for mortar and got a load of bricks. When a worker was told to bring a trowel, he brought a hammer. And when asked for a hammer, he brought a shovel or just walked away not knowing what was being said to him. Soon voices were rising in anger, and before long all were shouting at each other and striking each other until confusion reigned everywhere. Nobody could understand what happened, and nobody knew what to do about it. One by one, people got disgusted and walked off the job. Work on the tower stopped. And that reminds me of this little skit that this guy did. You could probably find it on YouTube. And it was very interesting on that one. Okay? On their way home, some of them maybe went shopping, but they didn't buy anything, for the storekeepers couldn't understand what they wanted. Pretty soon the whole place was in an uproar. Then one man said to his wife, "This is terrible. Let's pack up and leave. I can't stand this any longer." And so he gathered his belongings, his family, and perhaps a few others who could understand what he said, and then went away. Soon another man did the same, and another and another. Little groups began moving off in all directions until last no one was left to go on building the tower. There must have been something very wait. There must have been some very bad party. Boys and girls who had played together tried to say goodbye, but found they couldn't. Maybe they smiled and nodded and squeezed hands, but the words they tried to say sounded odd and ugly. Worse still, they couldn't plan to meet again. It was hard, but God was thinking only of their good, and they all needed to learn a lesson that it never pays to forget Him or disbelieve His promises. Then, of course, it has an illustration down at the bottom of people leaving. And that was part 3. And we got some more coming.